Focus Across the Woods. Memoir by Scott Wilhite. I hate victims who respect their executioners. Sartre. Chapter 1. My name is Scott, and I lived through something that either doesn't happen very often, or when it does, nobody reports it to the police. Or, if it's reported, the police completely mismanages the entire situation, resulting in another victimization of the person reporting it. I'm talking about non-consensual sex, in my situation, perpetrated by a female named Dusty. The non-consensual sex part is maybe 20% of this entire story, at best. And about 80% is of a criminal justice system so broken and vile. It's hard to continue to refer to it as the criminal justice system. I don't hate the government. I just wish there was a criminal justice system I could trust. However, one of the most important themes I intend to convey is the bottomless pit of self-blame, shame, and trauma that I continue to carry to this day. Not exactly in a self-pity, oh woe is me kind of way, but in a traumatic experiences don't discriminate kind of way. This should not happen to anyone. This burden ends now. I am officially offloading this guilt to Dusty Miller. Know her name. Dusty Renee Miller. I originally wrote this in February 2020, right when the pandemic started. I had been doing a lot of research on the subject of sexual assault and criminal justice, and by then was a few hours away from finishing a bachelor's in political science at a university in Texas. It's now 2025, and I've finished that, as well as a graduate program in the same discipline. I am also now 59, and rather than drag you, dear reader, through the dense academic drivel surrounding these subjects, I can summarize the most important academic literature I found over those 10 years in about one sentence. Rape is rape is rape is rape, and any suggestion about it being something else is ill-advised. So saith Professor Stuart P. Green, J.D., Rutgers University. He published a book called Criminalizing Sex, a Unified Liberal Theory in 2020. Professor Green's argument basically is, the new era we live in seems to be watering down the seriousness of sex crimes in various criminal statute language. According to Professor Green, new laws have weaker language, which could have a negative impact in enforcing the second most criminal act in the world, rape. This is based on the theory that list is murder, rape, kidnapping, then everything else. Murder and kidnapping don't have new watered-down language. Why should we water down rape? I agree. I am also biased, but also now formally educated. And in that education, I spent my fair share learning the philosophical ramblings of Ludwig Wittgenstein, Bertrand Russell, and many other academics who spend copious amounts of time trying to logically categorize the meaning of every word. Again, I can summarize and in this case synthesize Wittgenstein and Green into one sentence. Any penetration by any object into any orifice by another person without consent is rape, and this is an atomic fact. Sex crimes are becoming more sophisticated, but not at all a new phenomenon. And even since 2020, right after I finished the first draft of this book, unrelated scandalous criminal accusations have been reported in the media that may help frame what I'm going to write about, at least some of it, and 2020 is now 5 years ago. I've been carrying what I'm about to share since March 8, 2007, at around 3:30 p.m. I remember that day as if it was yesterday. I had written this over and over in my head so many times that by March 2020, I typed about 12,000 words a day for about 12 days straight. It truly was cathartic, but not cathartic enough to shake the shame. If the core issue for writing this book hadn't happened, I wouldn't have anything to tell you. But it did, so here I am. I lived with Dusty for most of 2006 in Rockwall, Texas. We lived in a 3-bedroom house in a typical Texas residential neighborhood. During that time, she secretly invited some small number of people into our home in the middle of the night while she and I had sex. Chasing sex and committing crimes in the process is also not new. In the book, American Juries, the authors detail a criminal trial from 1341 in England where a husband woke up in the middle of the night to find a closet dweller hiding so he could have sex with his wife. However, this case was not to prosecute the closet dweller, but to try murder charges against the husband, who, after finding the closet dweller and chasing him around the house for a few minutes, murdered him. The jury convicted the husband. I would disagree with the jury if the closet dweller was there to watch the wife and husband have sex, and the wife knew, or the husband if the situation were reversed. To be clear, Dusty invited people into our home in the middle of the night on nights she knew we were going to have sex. She didn't tell me about it, and they stayed for what appears to have been the majority of time we had sex, often hiding in a long, dark hall that led into our bedroom. She did this at least 9 separate times in 2006, and I would not have consented to anyone being in our home for anything like that under any circumstances. In law, material is a concept used to measure what really matters in a situation. For instance, if you bought a car from a car lot that was represented to you as fully functional but didn't have a transmission, the lack of a transmission is material to the deal you were just defrauded in. I'm mentioning it here to point out, as you read this, for you to consider whether you would still consent to have sex with someone you thought you were in a monogamous relationship with. If they later told you they helped sneak some people in to watch you without you knowing it. In other words, is the knowledge of the hall dwellers material to the implied consent you gave in having sex with another person? Would you still have sex if you knew that was going to happen? Implied consent is another legal term worth looking up, especially now, especially for young people in this new internet streaming era. The webcam scene in the movie American Pie is a type of sexual assault. For perspective, it's not complicated, and don't let anyone gaslight you into believing it is. But I will tell you, these things matter when one's autonomy is what's being stolen. One might say I was the center of attention for some deviant group of bullies who, to be honest, were probably more interested in watching Dusty perform than mocking my lack of awareness, or mocking something worse that the FBI did later. As you will also learn, the FBI got involved, but not to help me, and they blamed me for being a victim of a sex crime and signed their name to it. This phenomenon is also not new. The Department of Justice called the minor victims of Jeffrey Epstein prostitutes during the grand jury in Florida in 2008. That's the DOJ blaming a minor for the sex crimes. Again, this phenomenon is not at all new. Thanks to the DOJ, we now have a legal term for this, freak off. There were drugs involved in my situation, but I don't know every drug taken. I feel pretty certain I only took meth by choice, which obviously keeps you awake all night. But I also think Dusty took more than just meth, and probably took something different all the nights I know this happened. In fact, I know she took another illicit drug one night, as it was caught on video. There were details I later learned that suggested she could have also taken cocaine, MDMA, and GHB, in addition to the meth. It's hard to imagine she slipped me anything I wasn't aware of. What I cannot tell you as fact about all this is exactly why Dusty helped these people sneak in, everything they did while there, who they were, or if different people came on different nights. And had it not been for a video camera, I never would have found out. I met her around April 2005. She was 27 at that time. I was 40. She was married when I first met her, but within 2 or 3 days told me she was not happy in her marriage and had been planning on leaving her then husband, but that she hadn't told him yet. She had 2 kids, and I had 3. I had been divorced for about 3 years. I was also not looking for someone to date when I met her. She was my new apartment manager, and I randomly met her one day when I went to the leasing office. We lived in Texas, which means we follow Texas statutes, including statutes of limitations. Those limitations are different in most states, and depending on how one might interpret some of Dusty's acts, there could still be some criminal exposure for her from the state, as well as the others. But it's unlikely anything would happen, all things considered. And that's why I'm writing this, to tell you about all those things. And I promise that everything I write is the truth, and that when I speculate like why were dark hallway dwellers in my home in the middle of the night, I'll point that out. By the end of this book, you will also learn that I have a federal conviction for 18 U.S.C. Section 875C. That is a felony for allegedly threatening to injure the person of another. The truth is, I am not guilty of that, but the DOJ doesn't play fair. and although I'll speak to this in much more detail, I would just ask you to reserve judgment about it until the end. But please keep in mind I discovered Dusty Miller helped deviant sex predators into our house to watch us have sex without me knowing at least 9 times in 2006, and I only accidentally discovered this fact about 4 months later. It will become abundantly clear that I wasn't supposed to find out, and what Dusty did to try to hide it. And when I did accidentally find out, I wasn't just ignored, I was blamed. I was also indicted for 18 U.S.C. Section 875D. For this, I am very guilty. Proudly guilty. In fact, I waited for this crime to manifest before writing this book. Carpe diem, as they say. This indictment is where I volunteered to help other victims. To wit, after reporting what happened to me to every law enforcement agency I knew of that had jurisdiction, I wound up in communication with FBI Special Agent Monica Seghetti. She was a Dallas FBI agent who was assigned to the Public Corruption Division. She had been investigating the Rockwall County District Attorney. After it became obvious she was lying to me about my situation and wasn't going to help, I sent her an email with this included in it. Quote, "How about a truce? If you can find me a job as something like a paralegal or maybe forensic science in the FBI, but with no possibility of violence or anything like that, just something in the criminal justice system and preferably the legal end of it, I'll shut up." Emphasis added. I have to have a job and want one, and if I can't help myself, at least I can try to help others who find themselves in something like what I'm fighting through. I swear, I only want my life back. That's it. Unquote. That's a copy and paste from the indictment, not some non-essential or non-material email I obtained through discovery. I only have one small possible disagreement with it. I know my linguistic style. It's not like me to leave out please after if you can. I asked my attorney to double-check the discovery to see if the FBI had edited my criminal email for emphasis. My attorney wasn't very good. I don't think he ever checked. The extortion email was me finally recognizing law enforcement, writ large, do not care enough about sex crimes, especially from men. It took over a year of doing everything I thought I was supposed to do and reporting it, to all the institutions I thought I was supposed to report it to finally realize my government doesn't care. And in doing so, I knew I had to find another job, and floated the idea to Special Agent Seghetti. She called it extortion and put me in a federal detention center for 16 months. But it's not extortion. And I am here to tell you that I am now 59, just finished a graduate program in political science from a Texas university, as well as an undergrad political science program at another Texas university. So I can write this book, and to try to help others who find themselves in something like what I'm fighting through, emphasis added. And to write emphasis added as a fuck you to every cop and prosecutor who ignored me. That's it. That's why I'm writing this. You can call it successfully completed extortion or whatever. I sought an advanced degree in hopes that it gives me the credentials to be taken seriously. Not that a college diploma is the end-all be-all of credibility, but the truth is when I found out what happened and then started asking others for help, those others who are cops and prosecutors are expert gaslighters. They will do everything in their power, and they have a literal monopoly on power to overcome what does not serve their personal interests in too many cases, especially sex crimes. This includes committing rampant perjury. Combs' freak-offs is very close to what Dusty did to me, with a few exceptions, and I'll explain. I was actually tricked into moving in with Dusty in early February 2006. Within 24 hours, there was an unknown person to me moving a video camera around in the dark hallway that was on a tripod that was trained on our bed and recording, and the camera did not have any type of subject tracking. In fact, that technology wasn't even around at that time. And 14 months later, when I looked at that video, I discovered someone was moving it around as it was recording. Someone was moving the fucking video camera to follow us on the bed. So, was I in some way trafficked for some deviant, unlawful sex crimes? I am positive I was tricked into moving in with Dusty. I can't swear it was for sex crimes, but I know it wasn't for why she told me. I now suspect it was partially because she was about to lose her house because she was behind on the mortgage and lied to get me to move in. But let's say she knew she was going to pull some illegal sex party stunt, like a secret freak-off, within a few hours of me moving in, and I moved because of another lie. Is that her moving me from one place to another for an illegal reason? If it's not obvious, had I known about either, I would not have moved. You might be wondering who it was. You have no idea how traumatic that exact question is to me every time I think about it, which is still very often. The people who had the most opportunity, and opportunity is apparently a big deal in criminal investigations, were high school students from the neighborhood. So back to Combs. Freak-offs that could last 6 or more hours, video camera drugs, tricking me into moving to Rockwall, and minors. I'm not comparing my experience with Combs' alleged victims for attention. But I will tell you that what I've alleged so far happened, there's video of it, and when I reported it to the very same DOJ that is pretending to care about Combs, they charged me for telling Seghetti I would do justice myself if they didn't. I hate lying. I hate broken promises even more. This puts me in a tight spot. I learned a couple of hard facts pretty quickly after discovering what happened. First, law enforcement, including prosecutors, don't care enough about sex crimes, especially if a male is reporting them, even. Worse, they especially don't care when it's not something that happened in a dark alley by a perp with a lead pipe. As a male, rightly or wrongly, I think I'd rather it happen like that instead. At least I would have had a fighting chance, or a chance to not consent to having sex in front of a group of bullies. Another thing I learned is cops lie. District attorneys lie. U.S. attorneys lie. All of them. Under oath, every day, all the time. I would say never trust the police, but that's not practical. Same thing about intimate partners, but that's a death sentence. We have to make babies. I knew the risks and roadblocks I'd face when I reported what happened to the authorities. I had a cursory idea how law enforcement mistreated female victims of sex crimes, even though the Me Too movement hadn't happened yet. I honestly fell for the embarrassingly foolish idea that my privilege would enable me to fix the system. Please don't hold this against me. I'm very progressive and liberal, so social justice movements are somehow indoctrinated into people like me at some point. I learned real fast that I'm not the change agent women needed for overcoming intolerances when reporting sex crimes. And I'm sorry for thinking that. I truly am. But this story shouldn't be about me. The effects of a sex crime also do not discriminate between men and women. At least I assume they don't. I suspect there are nuances, but the trauma itself is real. The moment I found out what happened to me, my entire body shut down in slow motion. Everything that generated a sound became eerily quiet, all within about a minute. Everything around me evaporated into a disoriented haze of nothingness. Then it was like rebooting an old computer that took forever to come back to life. But instead of fully rebooting, it stuck in some endless loop. And in that same instant, my mind went into high gear in forming questions. How could that happen? Why did it? Who was it? I was livid. That turned to hurt, then self-loathing, then blaming myself, then blaming everybody around me. It was traumatizing. It is still traumatizing to think about. And there are also elements of what happened that point to a bias-motivated crime. It's a strange situation to say the least. The window of time that I'm going to write the most about is between 2005 and 2008. By around March 2007, I knew that if the oddities I already knew about continued to happen, writing a book to tell this story was a matter of when, not if. I will be using pseudonyms for some characters, but not many, and I haven't used one yet. Writing this also means I've worked up enough courage to come out of the closet with some details that went on in our bedroom back then. I tried blogging around 2007 after learning what Dusty did, but I was all over the map and hard to follow as I didn't want to share some of the more private details which needed to be shared for the story to make more sense. Although all that stuff still exists, it's time. Regarding who it was, there's only one group that could have done it, mostly because of who Dusty's circle of friends were, and some of the things Dusty told me during 2005 and 2006 that didn't exactly resonate at the time, but do now. According to Dusty, she and her ex-husband used to play strip poker with some neighborhood Rockwall High School students in the same garage and house I later moved into. She told me this story about a month before I moved in, when one of the male students knocked on the front door of her house and she immediately corralled him away from the door towards the yard so she could shut the door. I answered the door, I saw him. I asked her who it was when she came back in, and that's when she told me. Her garage was also oddly set up as a poker room then, as it had speakers hanging on the wall and cheap club lights on the ceiling and a fold-up poker table leaning against the wall. These obvious tells now didn't raise any red flags then, but this is why implied consent is so important. Dusty knew what she was going to do, even before I moved in, and she had a legal obligation to fully inform me about it, and didn't. According to Dusty, she was also personal friends with the elected district attorney then. This was Galen Ray Sumrow, the same Sumrow who was being investigated by the FBI at that time for being a corrupt DA. Dusty told me on more than one occasion how much Sumrow loved her. I wondered at the time if Sumrow could have been in my home in the middle of the night, but that seems too unlikely now. My story includes allegations of serious crimes. 2 for sure rise to aggravated second-degree felonies in Texas. If the unknown perps who conspired with Dusty were indeed minors, it's worse, and probably different. The video camera also captured a weapon on 2 of the 9 nights, which is why I include the aggravated part. As well, one of the perpetrators was close enough on one of the nights that they heard my say in a hushed tone to Dusty, "Why do you want me to do that?" And he whispers to Dusty, "So we can murder you." The murder part is clear and it was caught on video. For this, think of female teachers in their 20s who have illegal sexual relationships with their students. Sadly, that's very common nowadays. That doesn't mean there's an uptick in the crime happening. It means the internet is ferreting this stuff out. In my case, Dusty was a less credentialed teacher who admitted to taking her clothes off in front of high school students who lived in her neighborhood a few months before I moved in. I understand the seriousness of these allegations. I've since given up on the perpetrators facing criminal charges. If that happens, all I can say is they shouldn't have done it. What I am writing is the truth, and the only perpetrator I am positive about at this time is a female named Dusty Renee Miller.